The best-selling science book of all time is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. It's now over 25 million copies sold, just in the print edition alone. And I read that book when it first came out, and I got one quote I want to share with you. It's on page 171. He says, "We want to make sense of what we see around us and ask, what is the nature of the universe? What is our place in it? And where did it and we come from? Why is it the way it is?" And one reason why his book was so popular, he makes the point every human being asks these questions. Now I would argue that's because God put a spirit within each one of us. It's the spirit within us that drives us to ask these questions. But as I read his book, he really only provided physical answers for those questions, which is why I was motivated to write this book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, to not only look at the physical questions, but the spiritual questions, because that's really what drives us to ask the questions that he was talking about. And I'm going to pick one point only out of this book, and that is how God designed the universe for the eradication of evil and suffering. Now, of all the world's religions, only Christianity provides an adequate explanation for why evil exists in the world. Atheists try to throw this out as a stumper of Christianity, but atheism has no answer for why there's evil in the world. Only the Bible provides us with an answer. And again, we have the Bible on display at the back room. The Bible alone, of all the books that exist, provides an answer to the problem of evil. Now, many Christians focus on answering that question, the problem of evil. I've noticed, however, sometimes it can come across as a little hard or harsh when non-Christians are listening. So what I'm going to offer this evening is what I suggest is a more winsome and logical way to try to communicate the resolution of the problem of evil with people who are not within the Christian faith, with people who are not yet believers. And this actually factors into what we call the new atheism, the atheism of the 21st century, which is fundamentally based on this premise that we live in a universe that's way too messed up, way too chaotic for it to be created by a personal, loving God. So I'm going to show you some quotes from some of the more famous atheist scientists and how they articulate this. Stephen Hawking himself, in the very same book, A Brief History of Time, says, quote, "Our solar system certainly is a prerequisite for our existence, but there does not seem to be any need for all these other galaxies." Basically saying, if God's behind us, why 200 billion useless galaxies? And then we have Victor Stenger, the particle physicist I debated at the Caltech Skeptic Society conference. He wrote in his book, God, the Failed Hypothesis, "It seems inconceivable that a creator exists who has a special love for humanity and then relegated it to a tiny point in space and time." And he actually developed this as a, quote, a new argument against God by saying, if God really loved us, he would have allowed us to explore and inhabit the entirety of the universe. The fact that he confined us, put us in this little prison house of planet Earth, proves no such God exists. And we went on to say, does God really need so much pain and suffering to achieve his ends? This is a possible God, but a hideous God. And the debate we had at Caltech was all about the fine-tuning of the universe and whether that demonstrates there's God. His point was there's other ways God could have done it, which wouldn't have involved all this pain and suffering we see. But my response is this. Yes, God could have fine-tuned the universe, so we wouldn't need those 200 billion other galaxies. But it would have been a universe with different laws of physics. It would have been a universe with different space-time dimensionality. And God designed the space-time dimensionality and the laws of physics to be efficient tools for him to rapidly eliminate and eradicate evil, while at the same time enhancing the free will capability of human beings who choose to spend eternity with him. Because one of God's goals in creating was to magnify the expression of his love through his creatures. Well, let me get at the first issue that's been thrown out by these new atheists. Why so-called 200 billion useless galaxies? Why is the universe so very massive? With a universe that's governed by gravity, thermodynamics, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear force, the universe's mass determines what elements you'll see in the periodic table. If you make the universe more massive than what we observe, then the universe quickly takes all the primordial hydrogen and converts it into nothing but elements heavier than iron. And in such a universe, you've got no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, no possibility for life. Make the universe the slightest bit less massive, the universe forever will have only hydrogen, or at best just hydrogen and helium. Once again, you get a universe with no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen, and no possibility for life. To what degree do you have to fine-tune the mass? To better than 1 part in a quadrillion, 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 if you want to get adequate quantities of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen in the right ratios so life becomes possible in the universe. Now that's one reason why you have to fine-tune the size and the mass of the universe. I'll give you one more. There's actually several, but here's one more. The universe's mass also plays a role in determining how rapidly the universe expands. One thing I think you all remember from your junior high physics class, 2 massive bodies under the influence of gravity attract one another. And the closer together those bodies are, the more powerfully they attract. And so gravity acts as a brake on the expansion of the universe. But if God sets up the universe so that it expands too rapidly from the cosmic creation event, gravity will not be able to collect the primordial gas of the universe to make galaxies, stars, and planets. And if the universe is forever nothing but dispersed gas, there's no place for life to reside. Life becomes impossible. On the other hand, if you expand the universe at a slightly slower rate, gravity will so efficiently collect the mass of the universe that it quickly makes nothing but black holes and neutron stars. And there, the minimum density is 2 billion tons per level teaspoonful. Can you imagine putting that into a cup of coffee? Boom, 2 billion tons. The density is so extreme that molecules are impossible, atoms are impossible, even protons and electrons are impossible, and life is impossible. And here we see an even more extraordinary degree of fine-tuning design. So yes, given the laws of physics, the universe must be exactly the size and mass that it is, to an extremely high degree of fine-tuning design, or there'd be no possibility for physical life to exist anywhere, anytime in the universe. Which allows me to do a paraphrase of John 3:16. For God so loved human beings that he created 50 billion trillion stars, plus 100 times more stuff than that, because the stars only add up to a quarter of a percent, so that we could have one pale blue dot in which to live and enjoy life. So come Thanksgiving Day, I hope you thank God for those 50 billion trillion stars and all the rest of the stuff that makes up the universe. Well, why is the universe not only so large, but so old? In fact, I was on an airplane once with an atheist quantum physicist, and he asked me this question. Okay, if God really wanted human beings, why wait 13.8 billion years? So I was able to explain to him, given the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions that God chose, then if we were placed here earlier in the history of the universe, light from the cosmic creation event would not have enough time to travel on the space surface of the universe and reach our telescopes. So for example, if we were created 5 billion years earlier in cosmic history, we'd only be seeing the last 2/3 of cosmic history. We would be completely ignorant about the cosmic creation event. Now the same thing's true in the future, because right now we're living at a time when the farthest reaches of the universe are expanding relative to us at the velocity of light. Now, because of dark energy, in the future, they'll expand it more rapidly than the velocity of light. So if God put us here any later in the history of the universe, light from the cosmic creation event would be moving away from us at greater than the velocity of light, which means we wouldn't see it. Again, if God were to put us here 5 billion years into the future, we'd only be seeing the last 2/3 of the history of the universe. The one that created the universe wanted us human beings not only to be able to read the entirety of the 66 books of the Bible, he wanted us to be able to read the entirety of the book of nature, to be able to witness 100% of its history. And as an astronomer, I can tell you, it's our ability to actually directly image the cosmic creation event, to actually see what the universe looked like when it was only 1/100 of a trillionth of a second old, where we get the most compelling, rigorous scientific proof that a God beyond space and time created everything. God put us here at the one time in cosmic history when we could witness what he was doing from the cosmic creation event forward in time. Only at 13.8 billion years after the cosmic creation event can humans observe all of cosmic history and directly witness God bringing the universe into existence. And maybe I need to preface this a little bit. Astronomy is the one discipline of science where we directly access the past. Or as I tell my wife, because I'm an astronomer, I cannot be held responsible for events in the present. All of my data comes from the past, because it takes light time to travel from stars and galaxies to our telescopes. But we now have the capability to look so far away, we're looking literally at the cosmic creation event 13.8 billion years ago. So God so loved the human race that he invested 13.8 billion years of meticulous design to make a place for us to live and enjoy life and view all of cosmic history. If you pick up my latest book, Improbable Planet, you'll see a few paragraphs in there where I make the point that astronomers today now recognize that there cannot be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Why? Because everywhere else we look, we're looking back in time. And we now have the astronomical data to establish that it's physically impossible to bring intelligent life upon the cosmic scene in less than 13.79 billion years. And since that's where we are right now, we must be the first intelligent life on the cosmic scene. You know, God could have created them, but he would have created them at this moment, and since our data is from the past, which means we really should be shutting down the enterprise of looking for intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Okay, we live in a very dark universe. Why is it so dark? And let me give you an inventory on this. The stuff that we see in the universe, the heavens declare the glory of God, but the stuff we see in the heavens, it adds up to 0.27% of all the stuff of the universe. 99.73% of it is dark stuff. And there's 3 different kinds of dark stuff. Dark energy, which was discovered in 1999. Exotic dark matter, that's matter that doesn't strongly interact with light. And then ordinary dark matter, 99.73%. One thing we've discovered, we need exactly those quantities of darkness. The 3 different kinds of darkness had to be exquisitely fine-tuned in both their abundance and cosmic location to make life possible. Matter of fact, if the dark stuff were altered by just 1 part in 10 to 122nd power, 122 zeros after the 1, physical life would be impossible anytime, anywhere in the universe. Now that's a mind-boggling huge number. To put it in context, if you were to add up all the protons and neutrons in the universe, that's only 10 to the 79. We're talking 10 to the 122. And so what I've done in several of my books is to compare the fine-tuning design of the dark stuff in the universe to the very best example of human engineering, inventiveness, and engineering achievement, which in my opinion would be these amazing gravity wave telescopes that have just recently discovered gravity waves in the past year and a half. And we compare the fine-tuning design in the dark stuff to the best design that we human beings have been able to achieve. We see that the one that designed the dark stuff at a minimum is 10 to the 97 times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than the Caltech and MIT physicists that invented and designed these gravity wave telescopes. Or I could put it another way, 10 trillion times better funded than the US government that actually made these telescopes possible. Which establishes that we not only worship a God beyond space and time, it's a God that is personal in his ability to design the universe to such a great degree. Now, I've spoken on these subjects on university campuses where the audience is basically people with masters and Ph.D.s in the sciences who are not believers. And one of their responses is, we think it's just a sheer coincidence that we human beings happen to be here at the one time when we can astronomically observe all the cosmic history. That's just an accident. Well, I said, we do live in a universe of 200 billion galaxies, where each galaxy is an average of 200 billion stars. Don't you find it interesting that we are orbiting a star where we're in the unique location where we can see all of cosmic history? We're not only at that unique moment in time, we're also at that unique location within this vast, unimaginably big cosmos. Let me demonstrate this. Okay, here's our Milky Way galaxy, and our solar system is orbiting quite far away from the central bulge. That central bulge of our galaxy has half the stars in our galaxy. In the center of that bulge is a supergiant black hole radiating deadly radiation. We're far enough away where we're not being killed by that radiation. But we're also far enough away where the bright light of the center of our galaxy does not make astronomical observations impossible. But there's another point. Not only are we far from the galactic bulge, we're far from spiral arms. Right now, we're halfway in between the Perseus and Sagittarius spiral arms. Now, we cross the spiral arm every billion years, but the last time we crossed was 500 million years ago. Right now, we're halfway between. Now, that's the safest place for advanced life. You really can't have advanced life when you're close to a spiral arm. Again, radiation, and you've got dense molecular clouds that cause issues. But also, when you're close to the spiral arm, it illuminates the nighttime sky. Being halfway in between, that's what gives us a dark sky at night. And one of the amazing things about our Milky Way galaxy is that it has tiny gaseous nebulae. The only way you can sustain that spiral structure is to have these gaseous nebulae where new stars are forming, the maternity wards of our Milky Way galaxy. But unlike other spiral galaxies, we have hundreds of these, and they're all small. The other thing we notice about our solar system, it's a long ways from the nearest gaseous nebulae. The nearest one is the Orion Nebula. You can see it tonight, but you're going to need good eyes to be able to see it. It's barely visible to the naked eye. It's basically the central star of the sword that hangs down from the belt of Orion. But our Milky Way galaxy is atypical in that it does not have any large, bright, gaseous nebulae. For example, here's a spiral galaxy that's only 6% the size of our Milky Way galaxy. And this is one of the gaseous nebulae, the Tarantula Nebula, that exists. This is typical. The spiral galaxies have these big gaseous nebulae. What I'm going to do in the next slide is show you a side-by-side comparison, everything to scale in terms of the brightness and the size. And so on the right-hand side, we have the Tarantula Nebula. On the left-hand side, you have the Orion Nebula. Now, can you see the Orion Nebula? You probably can't, but what I'm going to do is show you another slide where I brighten it up by about a factor of 20 times. That little tiny dot, that's the Orion Nebula, 20 times brighter than what it really is. Now, if we were to have the Orion Nebula and the Tarantula Nebula trade places, it would fill 80 moon diameters across the sky. It would be so bright, it would be brighter than the full moon. You could read a newspaper by it. And it would be so bright, we'd have to shut down our telescopes. And then the other amazing thing is we live in a highly fine-tuned cluster of galaxies. Life is only possible in a cluster of galaxies for a number of reasons. But the vast majority of galaxies are in these really big, dense clusters of galaxies where you got 3 to 20,000 galaxies in the cluster, and they're all jammed tightly together. Here, for example, is the center of a typical cluster of galaxies. Now, can you imagine yourself being an astronomer, say on that spiral galaxy in the middle there? You look to one side, there's a supergiant galaxy. You look up to the top, there's another one, several on the bottom. It's really going to mess up your astronomical observations. We live in a cluster of galaxies where there are no giant galaxies. Two medium-large galaxies, ours and the Andromeda galaxy. And unlike what is typical where the galaxies are like this far apart, look how far apart they are in the local group. Here's our Milky Way galaxy down at the bottom. There's the Andromeda at the top. And you've got dwarf galaxies all the way through. We get a clear view of the heavens. Now, what I've briefly reviewed for you here is some of the evidences that we have that the universe is not only designed to make a home for us human beings and human civilization, it's designed for a purpose. The very fact that God put us at the one time where we could read 100% of the history book of the universe, and the only location in the universe where we could read 100%, implies that there must be some reason why God wanted us to have access to the entire history book of the universe. Just like I think you could make a case as a theologian for why God wanted us to have access to the entirety of the 66 books of the Bible, many of which you see on display at the back. So, we are at the one time and the one place, which I'd argue is evidence that there's purpose not only for the universe, but purpose for us human beings. The Theanthropic principle basically says the entire universe was designed and fine-tuned throughout its entire history to make possible an entry point for human beings. I'll talk about that tomorrow afternoon in my talk on the universe. But something that was discovered just a couple of decades ago is what's referred to as the Theanthropic principle inequality. Namely, that it takes a minimum, as I've already explained, 14 billion years to prepare a home for human beings. You cannot get advanced life on the cosmic scene any earlier than that, given the laws of physics. However, it was Brandon Carter that calculated that those same laws of physics and cosmic features tell us that the maximum time in which intelligent beings could live in a civilized state cannot be longer than 41,000 years. And tomorrow evening, I'll explain why I think the number is actually 10,000 years. Now, that's not the window of time for human existence. It's the window of time for human civilization. So yeah, we're talking Stone Age with just a few tens, thousands of people running around. You can get a slightly longer time window, only a slightly longer time window. Now, the reason why this is referred to as the Theanthropic principle inequality, there's about a factor of 1 million difference between the minimum time to prepare a home for us and the maximum time in which we could live in that home in a civilized state. And in my book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, you'll see several chapters laying out why this inequality must be true. I'm only going to give you a couple of highlights. One reason why we know we need about 14 billion years is because for advanced life to be possible, you have to be living on a planet that is super endowed in uranium and thorium. It's the decay of uranium and thorium that makes the continental land masses that I talked about this earlier today that we need for life. It also allows us to have a nice, strong, stable magnetic field that protects us from deadly solar and cosmic radiation. And what this curve shows you is that uranium and thorium are exclusively made in supergiant stars. And the universe aggressively makes these stars when it's young, but already the universe is making fewer and fewer of these supergiant stars. And now the uranium and thorium is decaying at a more rapid rate than the formation of the stars that make these two elements. But what I want you to notice is there's a point in the history of the universe where uranium and thorium hit a peak abundance. If you look at that date, that's when the universe is about 9.2 billion years old. When did the solar system form? It formed when the universe was 9.2 billion years old. And so our solar system formed at the moment uranium and thorium hit that peak abundance. Now you might say, well, why didn't God just create us human beings 4.6 billion years ago? Well, there's a reason why he waits. Actually, many reasons why he waits those extra 4.6 billion years. But I'll just show you one. Stars are like human beings. They're unstable when they're young, they're unstable when they're old. They're maximally stable when they're middle age. Only for stars it's far more extreme than it is for human beings, as this graph will show you here. This shows you the flaring activity of our star, the sun, and this is true of all stars, that when stars are young, they're throwing out ultraviolet, X-ray radiation, and these deadly flares. Now, the y-axis there is logarithmic. The flaring activity was 1,000,000 times more frequent and intense when the sun was young, and likewise will be so in the future when the sun is old. And what I want you to notice is that dotted line. It hits a minimum when the sun is 4.6 billion years old. So that's why you add the 4.6 to the 9.2, you get the 13.8. But something else astronomers have discovered, we're now seeing neutrinos coming out of the sun. And our measurements of neutrinos coming out of the solar furnace in the interior of the sun tells us that our star entered an exceptionally stable luminosity phase a little less than 50,000 years ago. And that luminosity stability will only last for most another 50,000 years. So that kind of gives you an idea of that narrow time window. We're looking at about a 90,000 year window in which we got sufficient solar luminosity stability where human civilization would be possible on the face of the earth. And you can combine this with the growth of the continents. For human civilization to be possible, you want the continents for a number of reasons to cover about 29% of the surface of the earth. Peter Ward, an atheist, has written a book where he says if it's 28%, we're in trouble. If it's 30%, we're in trouble. 29%, we're okay. The continents will continue to grow. They will eventually hit 30%. When do they hit 29%? When the earth is 4.6 billion years old. Again, you can get the book, Why the Universe is the Way It Is, and you'll see there are numerous reasons for why it takes that period of time, and also why we have multiple narrow time windows. And this actually enhances the fine-tuning argument because there are about 20 narrow time windows that are essential for human civilization, and they all have to coincide. So for example, there's the availability of fossil fuels. There's a narrow time window when you have that fossil fuel availability at a maximum. We're in that narrow slice. But that narrow slice of time must overlap the narrow slice that we get for optimal solar luminosity stability. And the fact that they all line up at that one moment tells us certainly this is the handiwork of God. Now, Brandon Carter, the British cosmologist, developed a philosophical application for this incredible anthropic principle, inequality. But I'll give credit to my wife. I think she's come up with a better one. And I've done a number of weddings, officiated a number of weddings. And what amazes me about the wedding ceremony, if you take out the music part and some of the remarks that the father of the bride might make, it's about a 20-minute ceremony. And in America, the average wedding costs about $20,000. In Asia, it's much more money, but here we're cheapskates. It's just $20,000. And if you look at the time that's spent in preparing for that 20-minute window, it adds up to about 1 man year. Well, I think more accurately, we would call it 1 woman year, since the ladies tend to spend more time on this. But you might argue, would the father of the bride be insane to spend $20,000 on something that lasts 20 minutes? Or would the bride and her mother spend a whole year of work preparing for that 20 minutes? We don't think they're insane because of how valuable that 20-minute moment is. Because that 20 minutes is a joining together of two families and establishing a man and a woman and a lifelong relationship that's going to be a testimony of the gospel to the world. Every time I do a wedding, I weave the gospel right into it. How the bride represents the church and the groom represents Christ. So it has incredible, not only physical significance and emotional significance, but spiritual significance as well. But it was Brandon Carter that pointed out, not a believer, he said, this anthropic principle in equality, I don't know everything that it means, but at a minimum it tells me there's somebody beyond the universe who puts an extremely high value on us human beings and a very high purpose. Nothing else, he says, can explain the significance of this enormous inequality, factor of million inequality. But I remember being on the airplane with this atheist quantum physicist. He asked me about 8 questions over the course of 2 hours about the universe. And one of the questions he asked was a decay question. He says, we live in a universe that has an extremely high measure of entropy. In fact, nothing is more entropic. Nothing is decaying at a more rapid rate than the whole universe itself. And he says, everywhere we look, we see decay. Now, this is actually something you see in the Bible. Romans 8 speaks about this pervasive law of decay in affecting the entirety of the universe. And so his question is, if God is all powerful and all loving, why all this decay? And so I explained to him that God designed the universe with this law of decay and the other laws of physics to make possible the redemption of billions of human beings, not over billions of years, but just thousands of years, accompanied with the permanent eradication of evil and the simultaneous enhancement of human free will. In other words, God gave the universe the best possible physics. In fact, I would argue this is where we see the greatest fine-tuning evidence of all. The universe being fine-tuned to be tools in God's hands to bring about the eradication of all evil and suffering, and to enable willing human beings to receive the offer of redemption through what Christ did on the cross, have an eternally secure relationship with Christ, and at the same time an enhanced free will and a greater capacity to love. And here's the Romans passage. The whole creation has been groaning under its bondage to decay. Now, as an astronomer, I can tell you, it's not possible to separate the space dimensions of the universe from the time dimension of the universe. So when this text talks about the entire universe, it's not talking about just the entire spatial geography. It's also talking about the entire temporality of the universe. The whole universe for the past 14 billion years has been subject to this pervasive law of decay. And sometimes I've taught to audiences where they dispute this idea that everything is decaying. I simply say, hey, look at one another. We're all evidences of ongoing decay with respect to time. But it's not all bad. The decay is such that it actually allows stars and planets to form. If the universe were decaying at a slower rate than what we observe, you wouldn't get galaxies forming or planets forming. Now, it's also true if you made it a greater level of decay, stars and planets would not form. The decay rate is fine-tuned to make possible, exquisitely fine-tuned, to make possible the galaxies, stars, and planets that are necessary for life. It's also exquisitely fine-tuned to allow plants to grow and to produce the food so that animals can digest that food and use that food to perform work. Unless these laws of physics were exquisitely fine-tuned, animals would not be possible, plants would not be possible. Now, these are some physical reasons for why we see this pervasive law of decay. There's also spiritual reasons, that it's optimal for the restraint of evil. It's optimal for preparing humans for their roles in the new creation. Several of us here have supervised graduate students, and one of our responsibilities as professors is we make our graduate students work hard. Or as I tell my graduate students, my job as your professor is to make you suffer at my hand. And what I find interesting, they'll actually pay a lot of money to my sponsoring institutions to suffer at my hand, and if I don't make them suffer enough, they complain to the dean. They want the suffering because they realize it will prepare them for a worthwhile, rewarding future career. Likewise, we're told in many of the New Testament texts, particularly Paul's writings and Peter's writings, that this is what's preparing us for future careers in the new creation. One of the things we notice is the decay rate is not so high as to discourage us from productive work. Now, we own a home in the Los Angeles basin up by the foothill mountains of the San Gabriels, and we've got a small backyard and a small front yard. My wife really likes that backyard and front yard to look a certain way. And so there will be times where she encourages me to devote a whole Saturday to getting the front and backyard the way she wants it. But one of the things I've observed as a physicist, I can spend a whole Saturday getting it the way she wants. The laws of physics within 2 weeks are going to put it back to exactly where it was before I did any work at all. And so my wife has a hard time motivating me to do yard work because I realize I could put in all that time and within 2 weeks I'm back to square one. If the rate of decay were even slightly higher than what we see in the universe, I don't think my wife would ever be able to motivate me to do yard work. It's basically, hey, it would immediately decay, what's the point? Fortunately, 2 weeks is not so long that she can't motivate me to do it, at least on occasion. But the other thing we want to notice is the decay rate is not so low as to let human sin and evil go unrestrained. Something we see in the Garden of Eden. The very moment that Adam and Eve rebel against their Creator, God tells them that from that point forward, they will be experiencing more pain, more work, and more wasted time. That's what you see in Genesis 3. And that curse is simply a consequence of God having already established the laws of physics, guaranteeing ahead of time that once sin is brought into God's creation, the more we human beings sin, the more work we're going to have to do, the more time we're going to waste, and the more pain we're going to experience, undoing the damage of the sin and evil that we introduce. And biologically, God designed us in such a way that none of us enjoys extra pain, extra work, or wasted time. You also see throughout the Bible exhortations to those in authority. When you discipline the evildoers, discipline them in such a way that they'll experience more pain, more work, and more wasted time. That's the way you can encourage them to avoid evil and to pursue a virtuous pathway. And in the process discover you can't do it by yourself. I mean, if we try to undo this damage of our sin and evil, we quickly discover that there's limitations. And those limitations are designed to motivate us to go to the only one that can really deliver us from the consequences of our evil and sin. And this extends not only to the law of decay, but the law of gravity, the law of electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and even our space-time dimensionality. One thing we notice in terms of time, we're all constrained to a single dimension of time. And the constraint is more than that. We're in a dimension of time where time cannot be stopped or reversed. And we're limited by 3 dimensions of space. Moreover, 3 dimensions of space that are rapidly expanding from the cosmic creation event. What this does, number one, it limits our human contacts. And because of how big the space dimensions are, it separates us from one another. So for example, if I got an evil thought in my mind where I want to do malice on someone I know in Germany, chances are I'm not going to be able to do much about it. I'm going to be limited by the space-time dimensionality God has imposed on me from being able to carry that out. The other thing you notice in Genesis chapter 6 is that here we have humanity living 800, 900 years, but it brings about untold multiplication of evil in the human species. Easy to understand. If you've got a serial killer living to be 900 years, they're going to kill a lot of people in 900 years. And who are they going to kill? They typically don't kill other serial killers. We notice that today. They go after the righteous. And so quickly, the human population weeded out the righteous and left just these wicked people there. But God in Genesis 6:3 shortens our lifespan to a maximum of about 120 years, which means that an Adolf Hitler is not able to do as much killing as he wanted to do. I mean, that's what happened in 1944. His doctors told him, "You're dying of Parkinson's disease." And just the knowledge that his life was soon going to come to end caused Adolf Hitler, especially in the last year of the war, to make decisions that basically limited the amount of people he intended to kill. He actually had a plan not only to eradicate Jewry from Europe, he had a plan to eradicate the German population. He was not able to carry it out. In fact, the last year of the war, he was speeding around in a special train all over Germany, exterminating German leaders left and right. But he couldn't get to all of them. He was limited in space, and he was limited in time. So the space-time dimensionality also is designed to be a factor in dealing with evil. But the bottom line is, there has to be some ultimate hope, purpose, and destiny for each one of us. The universe has been designed for us, has been designed to bring about the end of evil, it's been designed to allow us to see everything from the cosmic creation event forward. But here's the difference when you compare the Bible with the other religions of the world in the context of the problem of evil. Why the other religions really don't offer anything. The other religions offer the equivalent of a one creation model. Now, yes, they do talk about heaven, but they talk about heaven in a way that's comprehensible within our laws of physics and space-time dimensions. Only the Bible offers a true two creation model. The very good creation we see in Genesis 1, the best possible creation to eliminate evil and suffering and to enhance the free will capability of those who choose God's offers of redemption. But following this creation will be a brand new creation where there's no possibility for evil ever to exist. And because there's no possibility for evil, God no longer has to put chains around the new creation of gravity, thermodynamics, of the nuclear forces, or the space-time dimensions. Now he has the freedom to create a brand new realm, the ultimate creation. So this creation is a very good creation, but the ultimate perfect creation is yet to come. God will not bring it about until the problem of evil is done. You see that in Romans 8:23. Let me give you a quick overview of what I would refer to as the two creation model. I think you'll see why only this biblical two creation model offers a satisfactory answer to why there presently is evil and suffering in the world. Now, even before number one, and this is something I'll talk about tomorrow evening, how there are passages in the Bible that tell us God begins his works of redemption before he creates anything, which implies that everything that God creates is for the purpose of redemption. That's my message of tomorrow evening. But following God working out this plan of redemption and initiating his works of redemption, he creates our universe of matter, energy, space, and time. And then very carefully designs and fine-tunes the universe and the earth for the entry of us human beings. And he places Adam and Eve in Eden, in this idyllic paradise in the Garden of Eden. But here's something you see in the text. Now that we got Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, God opens a gate to the Garden of Eden and invites into the garden Satan. Who is Satan? First of all, Satan's the first sinner. Adam's not the first sinner. Satan's the first sinner. And Satan, we're told, is the most powerful being that God created. He's the most intelligent, the wisest, the most powerful. And God has him come into the Garden of Eden. Keep in mind, God had the option of keeping Satan away from humanity for the rest of eternity. God did not choose that option. He recognized that by bringing Satan in the Garden of Eden, we human beings would be exposed to the greatest challenge in the context of evil. Now let me give you an analogy. You know, Gary and I both have Ph.D. degrees. You know what that Ph.D. means? It's a guarantee that neither one of us will ever have to be tested for our competency in our specific disciplines, based on the idea that you and I have already been subjected to the most difficult tests possible in the context of our disciplines, so it's pointless to test us again. And so we get that guarantee. Well, likewise, God is providing us with a guarantee. by exposing us to the most difficult challenge in the context of evil. If we can pass that challenge, nothing can ever encourage us to use our free will for evil intent for the rest of eternity. We will have passed the most difficult tests. Now let me tell you a story. When I came to the University of Toronto as a freshman graduate student, there were 13 of us in the freshman class. And the professors in the astronomy department sat us down. And they said, "You 13 are the cream of the crop. We know you're all intelligent. We know you're all prepared to work very hard. Otherwise, you would have never gotten in here. We here on the professorial staff are here to help you and to assist you. But we guarantee that the program we're taking you through is way too challenging for you to pass it without our help. If you refuse our help, you will not get the Ph.D. We're here, we're available, please come to us." Okay, of the 13 of us, only 6 of us got the Ph.D. 2 of my peers wound up spending more than a year in the mental hospital. In fact, what's interesting, they had the 16-story physics and astronomy tower where we all worked. Right next door was a 12-story mental hospital. And we felt we needed corridors between the 2 buildings at different levels because of how many in the astronomy and physics department wound up spending time there.
It happened in the history department too.
Well, some of my professors were in there as well, so quite the place. But the whole point is this. My professors said they were available to help, but they did not give me a guarantee that if I took their help, I would pass. Because some of my peers did take their help and still did not pass. God gives us a guarantee. He basically tells us, you can't pass this test by yourself. Satan is way more powerful than you are. But if you come to me for help, I guarantee you will pass this most difficult test. And that's an offer he makes to all human beings. So he explains why God invited Satan into the Garden of Eden. And it's God himself who conquers evil on the cross. And then he brings this redemptive offer to all the people groups of the world. And then there reaches a point, as it says in Romans 8, when the full number of humans that God intends to redeem will be redeemed. And when that happens, God permanently eradicates evil and places redeemed humans in their new home, not this universe, but a brand new creation, where we humans will rule with Christ over the angels. You say, why over the angels? The angels watch the grace of God in operation in those of us who are followers of Jesus Christ. We who are followers experience the grace of God. And it's because of that special training, a time will come when we'll be rulers and judges and teachers over the angels, but also over everything else God chooses to create in the new creation. And there's actually a hint of that in Revelation 21. And what does it say about our blessed home in the future? I am making everything new. It's going to be nothing like this creation. As Paul says, it's beyond what any of us can think or imagine. And I'm just going to wrap this up pretty quickly. Normally I take 10 minutes to go through the description of what we got to look forward to in the new creation, but I want to leave some time for questions and discussion. We're told that the new creation begins immediately after the removal of evil. It's not the paradise of the Garden of Eden. It's way better than the Garden of Eden. Otherwise, why would God bring Satan? If that was the ultimate, there's no reason to bring Satan in there. But God is promising something far better, because our parents in Garden of Eden lacked something that we who are followers of Jesus Christ presently possess. We possess eternal security. They did not possess eternal security. The first creation is removed. As God spoke the universe into existence, a time will come when he will speak it out of existence. And several passages describe exactly how that will happen. And some of my cosmologist friends think they've actually found the model that's consistent with those biblical texts of God removing the universe. It's going to be a much bigger place than this planet Earth. I mean, this planet Earth, after all, is way too small to house the number of humans that God intends to redeem. It's going to be a place where nothing decays. It tells us that explicitly in Revelation 21. No decay. What does that mean? It means everything you create will need zero maintenance. I mean, everything we create in this world because of thermodynamics, at least for every 2 hours I spend creating, an hour has to go to maintaining what I create. There won't be any need to invest that hour in the new creation. It's a place where nothing dies. No death, no disease, no disabilities, no injuries. It's a place where there's no gravity and no electromagnetism. Say, how do you know that? It talks about this building, 1,500 miles on each side with corners. That violates the law of gravity. There's a reason why all cosmic bodies bigger than 300 kilometers across are spherical in shape. Gravity forces those spherical shapes. And yet we have something described in Revelation 21 that's much bigger than that. It also tells the new creation, no shadows, no darkness, no stars, no sun, because everything will emanate with light. That's not electromagnetism. It's a completely different kind of light. And it's a place where there's no grief, no remorse. I don't have time to go into that. There's reasons why we will not even have grief or remorse over those human beings that choose to spend eternity away from God. It's not going to be length, width, height, and time. It's going to be completely different dimensions. It may not even be space-time dimensions, but we do know there are dimensions. There's an angel with a measuring rod. It's a place of unimaginable joy, beauty, and peace, unimaginable reward and splendor. We're told none of us can possibly think or imagine how great the reward, the beauty, and splendor will be. It's a place of continual fellowship with God. It'll be a place of very fulfilling, purposeful careers, not just for a few decades, but for all eternity. They're going to be fulfilled in your career. Relationship limits will be limited, and our free will capacity will be expanded. Let me just finish this little description with a story of what happened when I signed my name in the back of a Gideon Bible, giving my life to Jesus Christ. I began to imagine life in the new creation and just saying, wouldn't it be incredible? I mean, we just heard Gary talk about these amazing apostles that we see in the New Testament. Don't you yearn to have a private afternoon office appointment with John, with Paul, with David, with Moses, and all the other heroes we see in the text? And I began to calculate the minimum number of redeemed human beings that will be there in the new creation. It exceeds about 35 billion human beings. That's conservative. It could be more. Okay. And I said, my name is Ross. I'm towards the end of the alphabet. If I try to get on the Apostle Paul's appointment calendar, I'm going to be waiting a really, really long time. In fact, I actually calculated how many tens of millions of years I'd have to wait before a 2-hour slot opens up on the Apostle Paul's appointment calendar. However, what I read in Revelation 21, we will be one as the Father and Son are one. There will be no marriages in the new creation. I discussed this with my wife, and I made the point. I think God's going to deliver us into geometric time in the new creation. We'll no longer be constrained to one dimension of time because there will no longer be the evil that requires us to be constrained to linear time. And if we're in geometric time, I'll be able to spend eternity with my wife where we're never apart from one another, just side by side for the rest of eternity. But that will not limit me from having a similar relationship with every other human being, an angel, and God himself in the new creation. And my friend, our philosopher on staff, Ken Sample, said, Hugh, I'm not so happy about this. I need my cave time where I'm all by myself. And I said, well, in geometric time, you can have a whole dimension of time where you're all by yourself for all of eternity, but simultaneously you can be having these intimate, eternal relationships with every other being in the new creation. He says, oh, okay, I think I can handle that part. But this leaves us with life's greatest question. A question you see in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, or chapter 2, verse 3. How shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? And here's what I'm suggesting. One reason why non-Christians that we engage will often just dismiss our presentation of what we're offering through Jesus Christ. They don't recognize the magnitude of what Christ suffered for them on the cross. That's another whole talk. but they also don't recognize the magnitude of what's being offered to them in the new creation. Now, the Apostle Paul said, no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. But as the same Apostle Paul has said, every day, spend some time meditating on your future reward and encourage one another with what you come up with. Yes, it's impossible to imagine how great and wonderful it'll be, but do your best to try. And whatever you come up with, realize God's offering something even better than that. And share that with one another. It will help you live a righteous life here and now and get ready for your future careers in the new creation. If you want to read more, you can check this out, why the universe is the way it is. But yeah, I got about 6 minutes left for questions and discussion, so whatever you want to raise up. Thank you.